Hello and a warm welcome to today's episode of The Real Talk. Today, the 8th of December in 2023. The Real Talk is proudly brought to you by the Youth Platform and its cooperating partners every Friday. And this is a platform where we young people get to have very important conversations and we drive our own narrative. That is what The Real Talk Show is all about. I'm your host for this week. My name is Iga Kapambwe and I'm joined by two amazing women who will be contributing to the conversation that we're having today. Now, you may be aware that Zambia is joining the rest of the countries, the rest of the world in celebrating 16 days of gender-based violence activism against women. Now, it is very, very key to note that this year's theme is centered around stopping violence against women. And that is the type of conversation that we are about to have today. Now on the show, I have Shadrick Chansa, who happens to be our sign language interpreter for today, and also Louis Mesigatoka, who's youth representative from FHI 360, Gezira Tembo, Director Technical from Rise Up Brother. Good afternoon to you, Louis. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Egan. I'm great, thanks. I hope you're well.
Good afternoon, Gezira. I'm well, thank you, Louis.
Good afternoon, Iga. Thank you very much. And good afternoon to our listeners and good afternoon to our viewers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. A warm welcome to both of you. Super excited to be having this conversation with you. I cannot wait to see how we're going to drive this conversation. I'm super passionate about both topics that we have, intertwined today. So I'm looking forward to how we're going to unpack this topic and just get to see what is it that you have to say about the effects of gender-based violence on adolescents and young women as we are having this conversation. So I'd like to start with Louis, because we have key aspects in our topic today. We have both gender-based violence and mental health. So I'd like you to start maybe by, defining what you make of the term mental health. What comes to your mind when you hear the term mental health?
Okay, thank you so much for that question, Egan. So mental health practically refers to a person's psychological as well as emotional being, and it encompasses our thoughts as well as our emotions, our behavior, and overall the state of our mental state. And it's really an essential component of our overall health, and impacts how we think as well as how we feel and how we act in our everyday life. And mental health practically also includes various aspects such as emotional well-being, like I said, but also cognitive abilities as well as our social functioning and the ability to handle stress effectively. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that elaborate definition of what mental health is. I'd like to switch to Gezire. What do you make of the term gender-based violence?
Okay, thank you very much, Iga, for that question. So basically, I think in layman's language, gender-based violence is just causing harm to a human being by virtue of their biological makeup. It could be them being female, it could be them being male. But in this case, we're talking about the effects of GBV on adolescent girls and young women. So we're going to strictly look at what gender-based violence means for the adolescent girls and young women. So in this case, we're looking at causing harm to a girl. That could be physical, bodily harm. It could be sexual harm. It could be economic harm, basically, in this regard.
Right. I think it's actually very interesting to note that GBV goes as far as economic violence, economic abuse, because mostly one of the things that I've noted is that in our social construct, what we believe to be gender-based violence is only a person raises their hand and lays it on another person. So I love it that you have given such an extensive explanation or description of what gender-based violence is. But Gezire, I would like to get back to you and maybe ask how does gender-based violence impact the mental health of adolescent girls and young women?
So I'll first like to say that gender-based violence, I think, like you've also said, is something that we've looked at just on the physical aspect point of view, but it comes in different forms, and there are different forms of gender-based violence. Like I had earlier mentioned, we have the physical, we have the emotional, we have the economical, we have the social as well, just to mention but a few. But this is something that is very critical in our current society, and it brings about a lot of psychosocial as well as cultural aspect as we talk about gender-based violence, because in different cultures, certain forms of gender-based violence are not even seen as gender-based violence. So it is with that regard that we also need to understand the social conforms that come with GBV. So I'll talk about the impact of gender-based violence on adolescent girls and young women. First and foremost, when an adolescent girl and young woman has been abused in any form, be it physical, be it bodily harm, be it sexual, it brings about a certain form of low self-esteem and worth. What do we mean by that? Because this adolescent has probably been beaten or they've been abused sexually, they tend to think less of themselves. And because of that, they don't feel as though they are worthy to be beautiful. They are worthy to be people of influence or change in society because of what they've gone through, especially if mental health component is not put into play in this regard. Then some adolescents will tend to get to have suicidal thoughts or behaviors, or ultimately even look at suicide as the end result of the abuse, especially if it's been perpetual or maybe it's been happening for a very long period of time. Then I'll also talk about something that is very common, just to mention but a few, that is substance abuse. This is just an easy form of getting relief, not to think about what you have been going through because of the abuse. Like I had earlier mentioned, be it physical, be it sexual, especially on the sexual part of violence. So the adolescents might tend to go into substance abuse, which could be alcohol abuse, it could be weed, it could be any form of substance abuse. And last but not the least, I also talk about its impact on relationships that adolescent girls might have. This could be at home, it could be at school, which might even affect their performance, as well as the ultimate influence of what they would want to be in the future, because they have been made to feel low self-esteem and self-worth. It means they can't really see so much of themselves in the future. So you see that in as much as we're looking at gender-based violence at this layer, it has its short-term result, it has its long-term result, and ultimately it affects not only the community, but the globe at large, especially if we look at the aspect of mental health, as Louis had earlier alluded to.
All right, thank you so much for making it clear. And I think that was very clear and concise. You went straight to the point and picked out some of the most important things that we could pick out as impact of gender-based violence on adolescent girls and young women. So for those of you that are watching us, you're following us on Facebook, you're following us on YouTube, be free to comment on this particular post. Tell us what you think are the effects of GBV on adolescent girls and young women. Be part of the conversation, and knowing what is it that you think concerning our topic for today is so much of our interest. So be sure to comment in the comment, to say something in the comment section. Now, Louis, I want to come to you. In her concluding remarks, as she was answering the previous question, Kezira talked about how gender-based violence has got both short-term and long-term effects rather. Would you like to maybe elaborate on what you think are the long-term consequences of GBV on maybe things like educational attainment, or for this particular demographic, and also maybe how it can affect the social relationships and support networks of these adolescent girls and young women?
Certainly. So, gender-based violence actually does have significant long-term consequences apart from the short-term. There's also long-term consequences on education attainment for adolescent girls and young women. And some of these consequences might include disruption of education, where because of gender-based violence, a girl's education is disrupted. And this mostly leads to somebody being absent from school or even dropping out of school. And there's so much fear as well as trauma and also physical injuries that result from violence that can make it difficult for adolescent girls and young women to constantly attend classes or participate effectively even in their learning. But then apart from that, there's also an aspect of emotional distress and a psychological impact that survivors or people that go through gender-based violence have. So with adolescent girls and young women who experience gender-based violence, they might suffer from emotional distress as well as low self-esteem and psychological trauma. And this can significantly affect their ability to concentrate, their ability to engage in learning activities, as well as their ability to attain information. And all this just ultimately hinders their education progress. And there's also an aspect of academic regression or delays, where the disruptions caused by GBV lead to academic regression or delays, falling behind in school, and all this can just demonstrate can just demotivate adolescent girls and young women and increase their likelihood to disengage from educational pursuits altogether. And they just tend to lose the zeal and the morale for school. But then when it comes to the social relationships and support networks for adolescent girls and young women, I think gender-based violence can have profound effects on the social relationships and support networks for adolescent girls and young women. And some of the ways in which this can be true is where adolescent girls and young women get to have trust as well as intimate issues. And GBV can actually perpetuate trust in relationships where survivors may find it challenging to just establish as well as maintain intimate relationships due to the fear of being vulnerable, the emotional scars that they have gone through, as well as just them having challenges or difficulties in trusting people or others. And they tend to also isolate themselves and withdraw themselves from society. And this mostly, the withdrawal mostly maybe from their friends, their families, their society, as well as their social networks. And it can be due to the fact that they feel ashamed and they don't want to be judged. So they fear being judged by their friends, their families, as well as them just having a sense of not wanting to burden others, where they don't want to open up to others because they feel opening up to others may be like a burden of you having to tell them your experience and you also having to transfer that trauma onto others. And there's also changes of family dynamics as well as stigma and judgment, where victims are blamed mostly. And this attitude comes from the community as always. The surrounding GBV can isolate adolescent girls and young women further. And this may just cause more stigma, more judgment, and the blame. So the cycle just keeps going on and on. So that's why it's just basically important to ensure that support is given to adolescent girls and young women that are affected by GBV. And this support can be given, for instance, by creating safer spaces, raising awareness about GBV, as well as combating stigma and fostering relationships, like positive relationships, and providing comprehensive support services for survivors of gender-based violence.
All right, Louis, thank you so much. The moment you mentioned, so it is important that young women or victims are supported, I was burning to ask you how communities can better support survivors of GBV and contribute to the healing process. So maybe while we're still at that, would you like to maybe cement your point? Are there any other things that you maybe think the community can do to, better support survivors of GBV and also just generally help in the healing process of the victims?
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of things that communities can do to support survivors of GBV, because remember, communities do play a vital role in major aspects of our lives, including supporting survivors of GBV. And one way in which communities can do this is by just generally raising awareness, as well as education within the community, where communities are educated, and promotion of awareness in these communities is done. And this is awareness on GBV, what GBV is, its prevalence, as well as its impact. And through educational programs as well as campaigns, individuals in the community can just be informed about the signs of violence, as well as the available resources and the various ways to support survivors. But then, apart from that, I think also communities can help establish safe spaces, where they get to create safe spaces within the community where survivors can feel comfortable and supported to go to whenever they're facing GBV. So this can include community centers, where you meetings for survivors of GBV in a safe and conducive environment. But also you get to encourage empathetic listening, where communities can be encouraged to be to listen empathetically by fostering an environment where survivors can feel safe to share their experiences without them feeling judged. Because one thing that hinders survivors of GBV from opening up to others is the fear of them being judged. So creating an environment where somebody is in a space where they're able to air out or to just pour out their experiences to others without them being judged, or without them being victim blamed. Because another thing that's common in our society is for the blame to be put on the victim, especially for adolescent girls and young women. Mostly, if somebody goes through gender-based violence, they don't look at what the perpetrator did or who was in the wrong. Most of the times, the blame is put on the victim. So there's a lot of victim blaming. So active listening, as well as validating the feelings of the survivor, is really important. And this can also just help communities support survivors of gender-based violence.
Right. Thank you so much, Louis. Very, very elaborate and straight to the point. Very insightful. For now, I would like us to check out some of the comments that we have in the comment section before we get back to Gezire. So Rebecca Mlenga is saying, one of the effects of gender-based violence is that it causes trauma and long-term mental health, which includes depression, anxiety, and fear that comes from being violated. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that comment. You're absolutely right. And Nkatia Chilesha is saying, so right, Louis. All right, thank you so much, Nkatia. It's glad to know that you're tuned in, and be sure to share this broadcast with family and friends. Jeff says GBV affects not only physical health, but also mental health, and may lead to self-harm, isolation, depression, and suicidal attempts. Watching from Mamba. All right, thank you so much, Jeff, for that particular comment. You are absolutely right. I'd like us to move back to Gezire for now, as we are waiting. So if you're watching, continue dropping your comments. We'll check them out again. I'd like to ask Gezire if there are any specific cultural or societal factors that exacerbate the impact of GBV on adolescent girls. And also, maybe while you are talking about that, how can awareness help in preventing GBV and support those who are affected by it, while we are still talking about the cultural and societal factors?
Okay, thank you very much, Iga, for that. So I would like to actually pick on from what my colleague Louis was talking about, looking at the importance of the communities and ultimately the smallest unit of the community being the family. So there is actually factors that actually do exacerbate the impact of GBV on adolescents. These could be cultural as well as societal factors. And this basically start from the family setup, and as we are raising our boys and our girls in our families. So even at family level, this is where we're beginning to see gender inequalities that will ultimately lead to stereotypes and ultimately gender-based violence. So I think using the same mode of culture as well as societal factors, that could be the way of ensuring that we have awareness about the importance of gender-based violence and its impact on mental health, not only for adolescent girls and young women, but also for the boys as well as the adults, because you see that it's a string of, or rather it's a ripple effect from where the root cause is, which is mostly the culture and the societal factors, to a family level, to the community, to a damaged survivor, causing damage to the children or to the spouse, then it becomes a global problem. And this is why we're talking about it right now. So I'll give about 3 examples of societal, rather cultural factors that do exacerbate GBV. So we have gender inequality that we had talked about, where we have very strict and we still uphold certain values that are detrimental to a certain gender. Specifically in this regard, it could be a girl where I think in the recent past, we had most of the boys being encouraged more to go to school in comparison to the girls, because I think a girl could easily get married to a rich man, or a girl can wait as we send the boy to school. We also have the traditional practices as well as customs that will actually encourage violence for adolescent girls and young women. And with that being said, as we look at some of the factors, we also need to look at who are the influencers, who are the gatekeepers in the community that we really need to reach out to ensure that we're looking at the root causes of these issues. So we're talking about the church leaders, we're talking about the headmen, we're talking about the teachers, we're talking about the parents themselves, because there are certain cultures that have been passed on and we are not even aware that they are actually encouraging GBV for adolescent girls and young women. We also then have social stigma, as well as, or rather, we also have social norms as well as stigma, especially for survivors, as Louis had made mention earlier. And there's also a culture of not wanting to talk about gender-based violence in our homes, especially when it comes to sexual violence, or rather physical violence. People will be there talking about, emotional violence. Don't talk to me like that because it's going to affect my mental health. But really what we do see in the communities, in our homes, is basically lack of education on what really is gender-based violence. How is gender-based violence affecting the adolescent girl and young woman in the community? What is the impact of that GBV on that girl, on their mental health, and on their future? So the lack of education, the lack of information, and the lack of communication is one of the indicators, or rather one of the reasons why this issue of gender-based violence is getting worse. I think I recently saw a report from the Central Statistical Office as well as the Zambia Police, where we have more than 10,000 just this year, 10,000 cases of reported cases of gender-based violence. Then you see that even before they could go to court, you see a drop in the number of cases that actually go to court. What are some of the reasons that lead to that? So another important aspect where we see GBV exacerbating is economic dependence. In an instance where the perpetrator, or rather the offender, is the one that is actually providing, then you'd find that there's less and less reporting. And if we look at some of the structures where we're doing our reporting from, we have very little safe spaces, as my colleague earlier had alluded to, Louis, where the adolescent girl and young woman can go and report this GBV case, because mostly the girls are referred to victim support unit, the girls are referred to the child protection unit. But are they feeling safe enough to walk into a police station to report that? Do we have a mental health specialist in that police station to provide that support that they need? But if you come back to some of the civil societies and what services they're offering, we have places like Rise Up Houses where a girl can actually walk in and get information about gender-based violence and actually be referred to. But how many of those safe spaces do we have, like the Rise Up Houses, like the Dream Centers? So this is where now the community has to come in to ensure that we provide a safe enough space for the girls to be able to come out. There should be a traditional leader that can be approached, especially if we look at the aspect of the Alangizi, we look at the aspect of the pastors and what influence they have on the community. Then we can also look at how these influencers can actually do provide solutions for that as we try and mitigate the impact of GBV cases for these adolescent girls and young women in the community. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kazire. Before we go to what resources are available for victims, I would like maybe to get back to Louis with one more question and just maybe ask her to discuss the link that exists between GBV, with factors like race, socioeconomic status, and maybe sexual orientation.
Sorry, Egan, can you repeat the question?
Yes, I was saying, are you able to discuss the link of GBV, considering the link that exists between GBV, race, socioeconomic status, and sexual orientation?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I think when it comes to GBV, there's like a lot of factors that are linked to GBV. It's not really a standalone component. So there's like a lot of linking factors that have to do with GBV and race, as well as socio-economic status. And some of these, especially when it comes to race and GBV, this mostly it's situations where individuals from I would say marginalized racial groups or ethnic groups get to face compounded forms of violence, and this is mostly due to intersecting systems of oppression. So racism and the various racial biases that exist do actually perpetuate gender-based violence, and they are contributing factors to the various disparities that exist in accessing support services. And in most cases, I feel marginalized communities do also experience unique forms of violence, and these unique forms of violence are mostly influenced by their culture or their historical factors. So you find somebody going through gender-based violence because of their race, somebody going through gender-based violence because of their historical factors, like their tribe, the tribe that they come from, and all these other disparities. And when it comes to socioeconomic status, as well as the link to gender-based violence, the socioeconomic disparities do actually perpetuate GBV. And in most cases, it's situations where individuals with lower socioeconomic status get to face barriers when it comes to them accessing resources such as shelter, legal aid, or even mental health services. And in most cases, economic disparities do increase the vulnerability of one being exposed to GBV and violence in general, and it does have an impact on their ability to leave them in abusive situations. And when it comes to, I think the other thing that you mentioned was sexual orientation and its link to GBV. So we, like I earlier said, we have marginalized groups of people in our communities. And we do have individuals that may face rather specific forms of gender-based violence. And most cases, these are intimate partner violence, there's hate crimes, as well as discrimination from the society that they belong to. And we've heard of situations where there's homophobia that's going on, transphobia, and all these can just contribute to invisibility of violence within marginalized groups of people and communities, and just in general hinder their access to cultural competent support.
Thank you so much, Louis, for that particular answer. Very, very profound and insightful. But before we get back to Gezira, let me just read a few comments here. Gabriel says, social media and economic fallout from GBV can lead to a loss of livelihood and increased gender inequalities in the long term. Reporting or seeking services for GBV can lead to further threats of violence, social stigma, and ostracization. All right, thank you so much, Gabriel, for that particular comment. Quite interesting view. He's saying reporting of GBV can lead to further threats of violence. So, yeah, I think I made mention at the beginning of the show that we are celebrating 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and our theme is encouraging us to unite and invest in preventing or ending violence against women. So maybe I'd like to just ask Gezire, also while commenting on the comment that has come from Gabriel, particularly about reporting causing further threats of violence. I'd like Gezira to just end our conversation with what are some of the resources that are available for victims of gender-based violence, and what are you envisioning? What message are you envisioning to be sent out during these 16 days of gender, activism against gender-based violence?
Okay, thank you very much, Iga. I think for us to even have 16 days of gender-based activism, it equally shows, it actually shows the importance that the globe has seen in ensuring that we provide more information about gender-based violence. And in this regard, our theme being Unite, invest to prevent violence against women and girls. So this commemoration actually started on the 25th of November and is going to run through to the 10th of December. So you look at the period because last week we were commemorating World AIDS Day. Why am I bringing in World AIDS Day? You'll be able to see that there's a ripple effect on what we're talking about to HIV, to mental health, and generally to how it affects the economic setup of the population at large. So I'd like to just look at the comment that was given. Yes, it's actually very scary for the survivor to be able to report the GBV case that they're going through, especially that the person who's probably seen as the offender is a family member or a well-known person or a person of influence. And these are some of the myths and misconceptions that actually come with the issues of GBV. So in reality, it's scary for the survivor to actually do report. But we do have trained personnel within the legal setting to actually support and see how they can investigate rather that, and how they can provide support to the survivor. So for instance, if we talk about the Zambia Police Service, I'm glad to mention of victim support unit, as well as child protection in this regard that looks at issues of gender-based violence. So I'm sure even as an adolescent, or rather a survivor is reporting, they do know how to handle the case so that the offender does not issue threats, or they don't even know that the survivor has actually gone to report. And we look at the support that we have with different civil societies that are working around gender-based violence, that are working around providing legal support to especially adolescent girls and young women. We'll talk about YWCA, which is the Young Women Christian Association. We'll talk about organizations.
All right. I think she has dropped off. Louis, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Egan.
All right. I think you can conclude the conversation.
Okay, so we are basically talking about the various resources that are there available for adolescent girls and young women that have or are survivors of violence. So there's also helplines or hotlines that can be used when you are going through GBV, or you're a survivor of GBV. So you can dial the line 111, which is the child helpline. I think Gezile did allude to the child line. And then you can also dial the 993 for adults. And these lines are just basically dedicated to provide support as well as information to survivors of GBV. And they are operated by trained professionals who can offer guidance as well as emotional support and refer survivors to appropriate services. But then apart from that, there's also shelters as well as safe houses. And Gezile did mention some of them. I think YWCA as well as Rise Up does offer some safe houses for survivors. And these shelters or safe houses, they actually provide temporary accommodation for survivors of GBV who just need a safe as well as a supportive place for them to be in during that period. And these facilities are equally equipped with trained staff who offer counseling as well as legal assistance and also other necessary services. But then survivors of violence can also be linked to support groups where they get to meet other survivors of GBV and just get to create a safe and supportive community, just to know that you are not alone. Like, we are in this together and we're gonna get out of this together. We're gonna figure it out. So just to show that there's that community, the supportive community that a survivor can be linked to. And these groups often offer an environment where survivors can also share their experiences and find solace, and also just learn from others' journey of healing as well as recovery. Because at the end of the day, what we want for our survivors of GBV is for them to heal from their past experiences and to recover from the trauma that they've gone through and all that. But then they are also linked to medical services. And these medical facilities provide essential care for survivors of GBV, and they also do some physical examinations as well as treatment of injuries, if any, as well as assess any sexual and reproductive health services. Yeah. And I think in most of our facilities here in Zambia, we have I think they're called one-stop centers, GBV one-stop centers, where you can go to and you can be offered the help that you need.
All right. Thank you so much, Louis. Thank you so much, Gazire. And thank you so much, Shadrach, for making time to be part of this conversation today. It's been interesting. It's been awesome. You lot have been loaded. You colleagues came loaded for this conversation, and it's just been so nice to chat with you and listen to the the insights that you have concerning the topic. And also, it's visible. I've been able to read the passion in how you've spoken about this particular topic. And to those of you that have been, following us from your homes, thank you so much for watching us. We've been, been live on Facebook, YouTube, and our topic for today was effects of GBV on adolescent girls and young women. We continue to commemorate 16 days of activism against gender-based violence against women. So this conversation continues. And also I must make mention that if you check our Facebook page on Facebook, if you check our Facebook page, we have, messages coming in from different people, different personalities have sent their messages to us on Facebook. So if you want to be part of the, that particular one, we are finishing on the 10th. So you still have time between now and the 10th. You could be that one person that sends us a message and we get to share it on our Facebook page. This has been the Real Talk Show right here on the Youth Platform page. I've been your host, Iga Kapambwe. Good afternoon and pleasant day ahead.